Well, hello, this is Dr. Alan Widener from MassageChairLeaf.com, and today we are welcoming Nicholas Beese, who is the Senior Sales Manager at Johnson Health Tech, which is the parent company of the Johnson Wellness Chairs, the Inner Balance Chairs, the Sinkin chairs, and someone who is quite well versed on a lot of the industry topics, issues, and news, news headlines for our industry. And he's in charge of all the massage and wellness for their company in the U.S. and Canada. And he also supports key international sales and international account sales, as well as influencing product design. And of course, that's a big deal with them now having purchased a majority stake in the Fuji Medical company in Japan. And we talked a little bit about that. But anyways, I don't want to go off too much on that. But I've known Nicholas for quite some time, since we started carrying their chairs. But we met last month, or in January, the end of January, at the Las Vegas Furniture Market. And we got to chit-chatting about all things massage chair, in terms of the what's going on in the industry, what the happenings are, what's new, what's old, what's on the way out, what's on the way in. And the topic of the Prop 65 came up. And I was introduced to this a few years ago when I had a customer wanting to return a chair. It was a customer from California that wanted to return a chair because it had some components or some upholstery or some chemical that was kind of I don't know what the word is, but it was not conducive to the Prop 65 mandate. And so we got to talking a lot about that, and I'd never heard of it before. Of course, I don't live in California. I have a store there now, but of course we've heard this come up a little bit more frequently. But Nicholas had a really good handle on it, and so I invited him to come and visit with us and chit-chat a little bit about this Prop 65. So Nicholas, welcome to this little session, this little interview today. Thanks for making yourself available.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me on.
Now, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, when we talk about, Prop 65, I was just going to kind of jump into it at like a 10,000 foot level. What is Prop 65?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Prop 65 is part of the Toxic Chemicals and Clean Water Act that California passed back in 1986. And basically, the official title is Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act, but we use the common term Prop 65. And it's effectively just a list of carcinogenic and cancer-causing chemicals that are just found in our daily lives, going about our business, going about our personal life. These are chemicals that we could come into contact with that are cancer-causing. And each year they go through and they revise this list and add chemicals to it or take chemicals off of this list. And these different chemicals, are things that they want us to be aware of as we go about our day. And what happened was on August 30th, 2018, there was a revision to the labeling law that went into effect that basically overnight, you might have never have heard of Prop 65 before, but then you would have seen Prop 65 labels everywhere. I'm out here in California. I would see them at the gas station, on the gas pump. They're on the car. They're, anywhere you might go, you could encounter one of these labels. So Prop 65 is something that is effectively just a list of cancer-causing chemicals that are out there, and that there was a revision to the labeling standards that occurred on August 30th that, kind of spawned a lot of these questions and put it, in the front of people's face in their daily lives.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is even though we're talking about the massage chair industry per se, these carcinogenic pollutants are everywhere. I mean, it's in the air. It's of course in gasoline, and I suspect even in some foods we eat. So this is not a thing that's isolated to massage chairs, or there's a higher propensity for massage chairs to be a problem. This is just something that's everywhere. Would you agree?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about the Prop 65 as it applies to massage chairs. And maybe if someone's curious about this, because Prop 65 applies to California only, but the premise of it is across the board, across the country, across any user. Can you talk a little bit about that as far as it relates to the massage chairs?
Yeah, so Prop 65 applies to any product or material that you're going to encounter. So a massage chair is just another product that you're going to interact with. Now, when you look at kind of how it leads into a massage chair, you're going to be looking at the foams, the fabrics, the plastics, the metals that are used within that product, what's in the circuit boards, and all of those various materials and components that make that up. So on a massage chair, you're going to have different foams in there. Foams had historically in the past had flame retardants added to them because that was what the furniture industry did. So these flame retardants in the past were put in all sorts of furniture, your drapes, even on people's clothing, they would use these flame retardants. And they started to have cases where, like firefighters and other people were starting to have some cancer-linked issues to a certain set of chemicals that was used within these flame retardants. So in massage chairs, they added a flame retardant list, essentially, of chemicals to Prop 65 that have to be labeled on that Prop 65 label if you use those flame retardant chemicals in there. So the flame retardants would be found in the foam in a massage chair, and if they're present in that foam, that product would require a Prop 65 label indicating those chemicals, letting you know that they're there. This could also come into play for the fabrics. The fabrics may use those chemicals as well, but it's not limited to the foam and the fabrics. You could have pieces of like a pump or a motor or something like that within the chair that also have those chemicals. And if you test above that threshold for those chemicals, again, that would have to be listed on that Prop 65 label on that product if those chemicals are present.
Okay. So the fact that a chair may have those chemicals doesn't mean that the chair can't be sold in the state of California. It just means that there has to be that advisory on the chair. And that, it's kind of like cigarettes are known to be hazardous to your health. It doesn't mean people can't smoke them. It just means you just need to be aware of the dangers.
Correct. Yeah, the whole labeling standard that they made the change back in August 30th, that's where that label made it where it had to be really front and center. It had to be very clearly labeled if those chemicals on that list were found in that product, and it was all required to be detailed on that label so a consumer could see if that was something that they wanted to investigate.
Well, and you had mentioned that Johnson does a tremendous amount of testing to either minimize or completely get rid of these carcinogenic, cancer-causing substances. Maybe go into detail about that. That's what really fascinated me. I had no idea there was so much testing that went into this, but tell me a little bit about what your company does for that.
Yeah, so when our company rolls out a massage chair, we have a pretty rigorous testing regime that we'll go through. We'll go through electrical tests, we'll go through flammability tests, we'll also go through Prop 65 testing, and depending on the market that the product's going into, there might be other countries' standards that come into effect as well. So with like the Prop 65 testing, they're going to be performing some burns of some of the materials within there to test for those flame retardant residues. So we'll send finished product, components, pieces of materials, formulas, different data to independent third-party labs that actually conduct this test for us. So we're not gonna, it's not like a company does self-testing on this. It needs to be a credible third-party lab. We have 2 main labs that we work with for this testing, and it's something that any of our massage chairs that will go through and perform all of this testing so that we can make sure our labeling is correct, and it's something that we're going to apply to our products.
Now, this test, obviously, when you're using third-party companies, you're going to incur a cost. It's going to become more expensive. That's going to include that testing, which is of course going to manifest itself in the cost of the chair. Is this kind of testing across the board, or is like I'm seeing chairs that are like $500, $1,000? Typically, I would think that they're minimizing costs at every corner. Is this something that maybe is just part of? I think we may have mentioned that this is kind of something that maybe the higher end, the nicer chairs put their money into.
Yeah, and that's something that, if you're a bigger brand and you're in some major retailers that have a presence in California, they're going to ask you about this. A lot of times it'll be, the onus is on the company that's bringing the product in, because the factories in Asia, they're just going to manufacture product to meet their local standards, and their job is to be an OEM supplier. So if a distributor contacts them and asks them for product, they're going to make that product to that distributor's specs. So if the distributor doesn't have them do that testing and they don't pay that cost, then you don't know if it's done. When you look at some of the more premium brands, they're going to have a larger presence. They're going to be in more of these brick and mortar locations within California. They're going to spend the money to have that compliance. I don't actually know what every brand is doing, but we've worked with other brands in the past, and some of them have been real diligent on making sure that they're doing this correctly. For us, we apply our own internal standards for our brands, but the factories always just make product to whatever the spec of that brand is. And it's easy to tell because you can just look on the label on the product and see if the label's there. You can see what chemicals are on that label as well. It's designed to be pretty user-friendly for a customer to take a look at.
I remember you mentioning how much energy went into getting the testing that you needed done for your chairs. And some of these factories were not even, like they'd never been asked to do this kind of testing before. So from what I remember, you were alluding to the fact that the standards you have for your testing, and not just on Prop 65 issues, but on just overall quality of the chair, is pretty vigorous and rigorous that the Chinese factories, some of them had never even done or seen before.
Yeah, we've ran into some hurdles with some of our partner factories that we work with where, we have products that have been delayed in excess of a year for not being able to meet our standards and testing. And it can be really frustrating for a factory that just wants to make things right away and get them out the door. For us, we have our set of standards that we apply, and that'll be to our factory or to partner factories. If it has our label on it, we're going to apply those standards. There's some factories that are real good about it too, where we don't have a lot of issue with it, but it's really all over the place. And it was surprising to me that some of the larger factories had no idea what the tests were, or it was like the first time they'd ever heard it. Because for us, we spend a substantial amount of money on every model before we sell a single chair in North America. And, for all these other factories that are doing a lot of volume, for them to just not even know, it was very surprising to me.
A lot of people wonder, why are these premium chairs or luxury chairs, why are they so much more expensive than these cheaper ones you might find on Amazon or eBay or whatnot? This is one of the reasons right here. And you know what, personally, I'd never even thought of it until I talked to you, that the amount of money that goes into testing and making sure you've got a product that comes out well built, compliant, and made out of good quality components, that all contributes to the price, but it contributes to the quality of chair you're getting. I would assume, Nick, that your failure rates are a lot lower than maybe what we might see on some of the other lower end chairs.
Yeah, definitely in the course of the testing, you find some unusual things. I would say particularly with some of what we do with electrical testing, you see some parts not pass standards that would have just normally have flown through had you not done that test. So we've definitely found a few components where, we found an inferior component that was weeded out as part of this testing, and we had to use, a more expensive, higher quality component to be able to pass that test.
Well, that's pretty neat. And I don't know what your failure rates are, but I do know that that of the chairs we've sold from your company, we don't get a lot of, at least that I'm aware of, we don't get a lot of complaints about chair issues. So I think that probably just that alone speaks to maybe the quality of chair you've got and the lower failure rate. So I couldn't be happier about that, especially since I have a lifetime labor warranty and I got to pay the repairs for chairs that are out of warranty. And it's nice to know that there's chairs that don't break down a lot.
Thank you.
You know what I mean? Now, is there anything else that I maybe have missed about the Prop 65 thing? Because I just thought of another thing I wanted to ask you about, unrelated to Prop 65, but is there anything else about Prop 65 that we haven't covered that maybe you wanted to mention, or have we pretty much covered it?
When I look at Prop 65, if I was a consumer, really all I want to know is, are there any chemicals that are in that product that require a label? Yes or no? If there are no chemicals, no labels required, that means that that brand has done enough testing to know that none of the chemicals that they tested for are on that list, so they don't have to put that label on. So you can make it real simple. Does this product have a Prop 65, label on it? Yes or no? If yes, then there's some cancer-causing chemicals in there. If no, then that was tested and it didn't have it. Now, there are little weird stipulations in the Prop 65 rule. Like if you have a company under a certain size of employees, you actually don't have to really comply with the standards. So, to me, I would just read it. You can find a little bit of information online if you want to get real specific on it. But, I think an easy way for a customer to look at it is just, does this require this label? Yes or no? And then you can take a look at the label and see what's on there. Now, if it's a real small company you've never heard from before, you might want to try to figure out, how many employees do they have? Do they actually have to comply with these standards and things like that? So when in doubt, do a little more research. But if it's a big company, that you have a lot of presence with, you can just look at it as, is this label required, yes or no? And that should answer a lot of your questions.
Okay, but what about companies or people that import chairs out of the state of California? Let's say they live in, Timbuktu, somewhere in the middle of the country where there's no ports or anything like that. It's just they just have a warehouse where they inventory their chairs and they sell them to California. Is there a mandate for them to have that label if they are selling chairs to California, or is it only apply to people or to companies that warehouse their chairs in California?
If the product makes it to California, it's going to need to have that labeling on it because it could get resold there. You could have it end up in like a consignment store or something like that. So it's something that if it makes it in there, it should have it. And most companies that are doing business in the US are going to do business in California as it's a major market. So as a general rule, you'll usually see if it's sold in the US, it's going to be sold in California. If it's sold in California, the California standards will apply to it.
Okay, because I could see it's just a small two-bit operator bringing in the chairs, calling them, Fred's chair or whatever, and they're selling them on online and not caring about the label, and of course maybe there is they don't need to based on the the number of employees they have, but that would be a source of consternation for me as a buyer. Like I'd want to know. I probably would want to know. So I wonder how much of a deal that is or not.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that it's hard to tell, because you don't know until you do the test and until you look into it. It's certainly possible for someone to bring in product that, is not compliant, and it's certainly possible for the bulk of their business to be outside of the California market and them to still ship some product in there. the devil's always in the details on these type of things.
Yeah. All right. Well, that has been great, Nicholas. I really appreciate that input from you. Just in closing, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this coronavirus thing in terms of how it is affecting, if it is affecting your stock or availability of parts or anything like that. Do you have any kind of input on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to look, it's going to affect everything coming out of Asia. Some companies planned to have enough of a buffer that they're not very heavily affected. Some of the markets aren't so affected. Like if your product is coming out of an outside market, like for example, we bring in chairs from Japan. That has not been an issue for us with our supplier in Japan, but we have some suppliers in China that have been affected. And for us, it just causes some delays in ETDs and when we're going to get our product. For parts, for the most part, it would only affect you if you were really low on inventory of parts. And as a brand, you typically don't run that low of inventory on something because it's too hard to get the part there fast enough to provide service. So usually you typically have enough of a buffer on parts. You might have a hot selling chair that you run out of or something like that. But right now it's a delay, but it's manageable. If you were running real lean on inventory all the time, it could put you in a bit of a bind. It just would depend on each individual company's business plans, but it has affected things over there. But it just depends on the factory, where it's coming from, and kind of how that company runs their operations as well.
Well, yeah, of course, those manufacturing plants, their parts come from other little factories around China. So it's not just that one factory. There's a lot of players that can be affected. So I guess you would hope that everybody is kind of prudent and have foresight in their inventory and in their ability to handle things like this coming up.
Yeah, we had a supplier that it's kind of the situation that you're describing, where it was a factory that was affected by it. And we ran into a situation where some components came out of a factory that was just closed down as a result of this. So that factory had to scramble to find a replacement compliant component, in a short window. Wow. And a lot of times they have other resources to turn to where maybe it costs them more money to buy this other component from somewhere else on short notice, but they typically have some options. It just requires a lot more effort on their part to change the way they were doing it from one way to another way on the fly like this.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is a timely topic right now in the world, let alone in our industry. But yeah, I appreciate your input on that too. But it's been great visiting with you, Nick. Thank you for doing this. I know you're a very busy man, and getting time with you is not always easy.
Not a problem.
I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, not a problem. Happy to get on the call with you.
All right, Nick. We'll see you. Thank you.
All right, see you. Have a good day. Bye.